Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, July 20th, 2018. Time for yet another show. It's Friday. I don't know whether that's good news or bad news anymore. I don't know if there's any sense of relief that you take from the weekend or not, but I guess you can sleep later. And Donald Trump, I don't think he anger tweets quite as early in the morning on the weekends. And sometimes he plays golf and he doesn't anger tweet at all once he gets on the golf course. And that's kind of a relief. I've been tweeting a little bit about Donald Trump this morning, and I think it makes perhaps a good theme for a show. And I don't know if I'll be able to avoid it, because you know how this show works. There's no set agenda. Just like meeting with Vladimir Putin, I have no set agenda. Tell me what you want to talk about, Vlad. And I'm an agreeable guy. I'd have a lot of the same problems, I think, as Donald Trump if I were president, although I do like to think I would be able to recognize my limits and say, I don't know if I can be president. I mean, I guess if the job is thrust upon me somehow, I would say, okay, I need some competent people around me, as opposed to, I'm just going to do things the way I've always done them. And sometimes I wonder whether that's more of a function of age with him than even a function of his ego. But it's inescapable. I don't know how you get away from how he's been raised and how he's lived his entire life and what he thinks has brought him what he believes to be success. So I don't know if it might be useless to try to separate that out. Anyway, Daily Kos Radio is live now, and I'll tell you what's on Bill's agenda. And I might as well just do the show this way. Honestly, whatever you want, Bill, because how far wrong could you go? Daily Kos Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, and that's how you can reach me on Twitter. And if you're new to the show, because I did actually mention today, say, by the way, if you're reading along with my thread here, I'm going to basically turn this thread into a live stream radio show. And actually, it struck me that all my kids are very big into watching people live stream things on YouTube. And I guess we're doing the same thing here. Anyway, might as well warm up this way on Twitter and just let it all out on the radio. But if you want to help direct some of that rant, remember that you can do it with the Kagro in the Morning or KITM hashtag on Twitter. And no guarantees, of course, because I sometimes get lost in my own thoughts. But if I have my eye on Twitter and I see your comment flash by, I like to try to respond or redirect as reasonable. But Daily Kos Radio now being live, Kagro X, that's me, reminds you that you can't spell treason or Trump without TR. And this is not a coincidence. And this is bad news for Teddy Roosevelt, who I know is TR. He's rolling over in his grave, but Teddy Roosevelt was a very active man, and I think he would probably enjoy rolling over in his grave. And so I can't say for sure that that's a bad thing. Anyway, let's see. This supposed thread that I told you about, that I threatened to discuss with you this morning. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I know even what inspired all of this. I guess, if anything, by way of launching the thing, I don't know. I didn't even really think of the comment as particularly interesting when I saw it this morning. Glenn Greenwald tweeted something or other about what's going on in Trump Russia, and I usually, when the subject is Trump Russia in particular, will disagree. And I don't know, I should even go and see if I can even find the thing. But he was trying to make a point about, God, who even knows what? But basically that we were hanging too much on the notion of this collusion between Donald Trump and either Vladimir Putin or Russia as a governmental entity, whichever one we think he might be colluding with. And I don't know. It seemed to me like he was, well, as frequently happens, blowing straight past the point. But I don't even remember when it was. Let's see. I'll see if I can find it. He's rather prolific. And so, oh yes, this was it. This, and I think there's a thread to this one. Here's how he starts. Whatever else is true, he says, U.S.-Russia relations are an extremely serious issue now being discussed solely through the lens of bipartisan / media groupthink unseen since 2002, exacerbated by cheap social media grandstanding. Yes. At least includes some dissent. And what's he attached here? There's a YouTube video that he's attached that I don't even know what this is. But let's click on it here. I don't really want to play the thing here, but these American scholars say the real threat to the U.S. is Russophobia. They say Russophobia, I don't know, do we say Russophobia or Russophobia, is running amok in the U.S. And, there's a certain point to that. But continuing on and reading the rest of this thread, and I guess that might even have been one of the final tweets in the thread. But going back, it begins with this report from NPR. NPR, that is, not Fox, he says, points out what the self-serving cable and Twitter hysteria will never mention. Of course, they mention it, but you don't acknowledge anybody that mentions it because whatever. But look, that's the way Twitter works. I'm sure I do the same thing too. Anyway, he goes on to say, despite the rhetoric, Trump's, quote, policies toward Russia have been combative, belligerent, and provocative, which I think is bad. And here, this is the sort of thing I think that keeps, there's a redeeming value in monitoring what Glenn Greenwald has to say. Every once in a while, he reminds you of things that you say, all right, as annoying as it is when you say it, it pays to give some thought to this. It is and I think this is, it motivated my own thinking, but I also think that there's something in here that motivates some of what Donald Trump does, which he tells you is his thinking. And it's here in this parenthetical comment, which I think is bad. Trump's policies toward Russia have been combative, belligerent, and provocative, which I think is bad. Now, lots wrapped up in this, and I think it's motivated by, and you can see it's motivated by the fact that he includes this screenshot here. Basically, Trump over the last couple of days, and all along, has said things as dumb as, nobody's been tougher on Russia than I have. No president has ever been tougher on Russia. And when he says that, and we all laugh, but he may think it's true. That doesn't mean it's true by any stretch of the imagination. That doesn't mean it's a real thing by any stretch of the imagination. The fact that Donald Trump believes something is true is probably your best assumption straight out of the gate is that's not true, and it's only something that he wants to be true in his head, in his world, and so the way he deals with reality is he declares these things to be true, and for him, he's had 70-something years of practice of just making them true, or paying enough people enough money to force them to pretend that it's true, or whatever version of reality it is that he's created for himself, and whatever tools he uses to create it. Okay, so he thinks he's been tough on Russia, but is there a germ of truth to it at all that he bases things on, or does he simply make it up? Sometimes he does one, sometimes he does the other. What they point to, or what the people he's hired and made their job, it's your job to make it look like I know what I'm talking about and make the things I say look like they might be true. Point to things like this. And here is, I guess, this NPR article, and he's taking the screen grab, and it says, should I just read the highlighted part, or I'll read the whole setup. President Trump is in the process of inviting Russian President Vladimir Putin to come to Washington, D.C. this fall to continue the talks, or whatever they were, that they started in Helsinki earlier this week. Okay. That's a subject that we, of course, have to talk about. It broke as news, I guess, yesterday afternoon. Yeah, he's going to have Vladimir Putin come to Washington and I guess to the White House. And I don't know if they're going to make their way to Mar-a-Lago. I don't know if Trump or if Putin plays golf. I don't know what they're going to do. Who cares? it's a bad idea, etc. Everybody was interested in watching Dan Coates respond to it. There was a news story there. But okay, it's another sign, the NPR article continues, of Trump's efforts to build closer ties with Moscow, even though he insists his administration has taken a hard line toward Russia. There's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been, Trump told reporters on Wednesday. That might sound like hyperbole, and it is hyperbole, but, is there any basis in reality? They think so. They go on to say, in this case, there's actually some basis for the president's boast. And I guess, again, here we have he's a very complicated individual. For somebody who doesn't understand complexity or nuance, he's very complicated. It is still a boast. It is hyperbole. And there are things that you can point to that you can say, well, that's tough on Russia, I guess, sort of. Or you might be able to even say that's tougher on Russia than anyone else has been with respect to that thing. But that's not really... I don't know how tough it really is on Russia, and I don't know how much of it he's really, doing, and it's not always directly related to being tough on Russia. All right, so here's the highlighted part. When you actually look at the substance of what this administration has done, not the rhetoric, but the substance, this administration has been much tougher on Russia than any in the post-Cold War era, said Daniel I don't know how you say it, Vajdic. What? Are you kidding me? This is a glitch in the Matrix. Call Oliver Willis. His last name is V-A-J. I'm not kidding. And I know it's spelled with a G, but, people will tweet on Twitter when they say that. V-A-J-D-I-C-H. Now, if you're like Germanic, how do you say D-I-C-H, right? Dick? I get Vaj Dick? Are you joking? Something is... Really? How do you say that? He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's not at the, Academy of Porn Movies or anything like that. I don't even know. I don't know who is the guy. He's probably serious, and I'm looking like a moron. How dare you make fun of the fact that his name is... I can't help it. It's very early in the morning, and I'm not functioning fully necessarily. Okay, this is the guy. Now, again, I don't know. Is that the guy that Glenn's pointing to with that YouTube video, which I think is a promo from HBO? These American scholars say that the real threat is Russophobia. Is one of them this guy, Daniel, we'll call him? Maybe. That might be what they're referring to. Anyway, here's the deal. Why would anyone consider this administration to have been much tougher on Russia than any in the post-Cold War era? Well, NPR says, take military spending. Trump sought to add $1.4 billion for fiscal year 2018 to the European Reassurance Initiative, a military effort to deter Russian aggression. That's a 41% increase from the last year of the Obama administration. The president also agreed to send lethal weapons to Ukraine. Not the movie, but actual weapons. A step that Obama resisted. And Trump gave U.S. forces in Syria more leeway to engage with Russian troops. Now, the last two things, I guess, are a little more concrete. I can't believe that they didn't get top mention. Like, quite honestly, my first reaction to... he sought to add $1.4 billion for fiscal year 2018 to the European Reassurance Initiative. I said, holy mother... Are you kidding me? My God, the Russians must be crapping their... What sort of pants did they wear? I don't know. There's no chance that sparked any kind of reaction at all in Russia. I mean, maybe. There are probably some policy expert geniuses there who are like, I really don't like the way they... I don't like their tone there at the European Reassurance Initiative. And it bothers me that they would get an additional $1.4 billion. But really, that's the top billing? Well, when you look at the substance of what he's done, why, he's tougher than any president of the post-Cold War era. Do you realize that he sent $1.4 billion additional dollars in this fiscal year alone to the European Reassurance Initiative? I can't imagine that striking anybody as, holy mackerel, that really is. That's far and away the toughest any post-Cold War president has ever been on Russia. I don't believe I know anyone who would say that was of any interest whatsoever in evaluating the proposition that some president, Trump or any other, should be regarded as the toughest on Russia of the post-Cold War era. I can't believe that. Now, if you happen to also have in your pocket that the president agreed to send, arms to Ukraine, or that he's given U.S. forces in Syria more leeway to engage with Russian troops, I would say those things are, I don't know what, they're interesting, they're belligerent, and Glenn's right in that they're probably bad in a way. I don't know how I would, I don't know enough to make a snap judgment, certainly, right now, about whether or not I think sending arms to Ukraine is a good idea. Off the top of my head, with no real training in this, I would say, well, I'd at least recognize this. You make me president, I'd say, that sounds like something that we need to consider very, very carefully. I would like to, who's my secretary? Joe, I'll say, Secretary Joe, get me a meeting with all the people who I would have to listen to as president of the United States, who could weigh in on whether or not sending weapons to Ukraine is as bad an idea as it sounds like. Because what it sounds to me like, I'm for democracy, right? I'm the American president. I'm pro-democracy. This one we have right now, not so much. I am. But we are sending weapons to a former Soviet republic that shares an enormous border and enormous cultural and economic and historical and geopolitical ties with Russia. And they've been ups and downs, let's say, to that relationship. It's a very difficult situation. Now, sending weapons there when they're engaged in what is essentially a hot war might be viewed as exceedingly provocative by the Russians. It's the sort of thing that under certain circumstances in the past, one might have guessed would trigger the threat of nuclear war certainly with the old Soviet Union. I mean, if you sent separatist rebels in the Ukrainian SSR weapons to fight Moscow, they would probably say, that's it, we're at war. That's no longer the case, of course, but it's certainly within the traditional sphere of influence, well within the sphere of influence of Russia, of Moscow, that they're going to take a very dim view of that ordinarily. And again, lots going on here. Russia, the Russian government, the Russian polity is not the same thing as Vladimir Putin's operation, though one of the arms of Vladimir Putin's operation is ostensibly the government of Russia, but there's more at stake for Vladimir Putin than the governance of Russia. He's got his own interests in all this, and it may very well be that Vladimir Putin's operation doesn't mind there being a hot shooting war with Ukraine versus, Russian forces because, they're not my personal security forces, the guys I know. So, and in some cases it probably is. Do you feel like adventuring this weekend? You want to go do some Soldier of Fortune stuff? God be with you. I'll commission you a general this weekend and you go lead separatist rebels in Ukraine. But, for the most part, Russian troops, even special forces troops, relatively expendable, I would think, to Vladimir Putin. And he's not terribly disturbed by the notion of Russian troops being killed in combat for, Russian national interests in a border country like Ukraine. Doesn't bother him the same way it might bother a conscientious American president who loses American forces. And it doesn't seem to bother a lot of them either. But anyway, it might very well be, you'd think, well, Russia wouldn't want the United States supplying people who are going to fight Russian forces. Ordinarily, that's a bad thing for Russia. But, like I said, Russia's being run by somebody who doesn't necessarily have Russia's interests chiefly at heart, just as our country isn't run by a president with America's, whatever that is, interests, whatever they may be, chiefly at heart. He has his own interests at heart. He doesn't distinguish between his own interests and those of the United States because he's got a simpleton's view of the presidency, which is to say, just as he thinks nothing he does can be illegal because he's the one who gets to say what the laws are, even though that's not supposed to be true. But Brett Kavanaugh says it is, so watch out. He thinks there can't, like by definition, be any separation between my personal judgment about, at the very least, judgment about what is in America's interests and what America's interests truly are. As president, I get to say what America's interests are. And, there's a school of thought under which that's not entirely wrong. But it's a school of thought, and Donald Trump doesn't go to school, and he doesn't school himself in these schools of thoughts. It's just, I thought that was what the president got to do. And it doesn't matter what views the president brings to that school of thought. It's just automatically the case. And again, there are probably legal scholars out there that say, yeah, we don't make inquiries into whether or not the president is too dumb a person to be trusted with this. The vote says what it says, and that's your prerogative. Now we all have to agree that America's interests are what you say they are. The other problem Donald Trump has is that he doesn't separate his personal interests from the interests of the government of the United States, the polity, the American people. He views things that are good for him as self-evidently good for the United States as well. And some of that comes from prosperity gospel type thinking. Some of that comes from Calvin Coolidge type thinking of the business of America is business. And I'm a businessman. So if I make a business deal that's good for me, yeah, I make a lot of money, but the excuse, I make lots of money, but that also means that lots of jobs are created and lots of other people make lots of money too. Like the $10 an hour I give you to open the door at the building I'm going to build in Moscow or whatever. He confuses his personal good fortune with that of the government of the United States and the interests of America with his own interests. And like I said, there are theoreticians who won't prove him wrong. Anyway, so in other words, he and Putin function in very much the same way. So I can't say for sure whether or not any of the things that this person, Daniel, and his fan, Glenn Greenwald here, I don't know whether any of the things that they consider to be bad for Russia are considered by Vladimir Putin to be bad for Russia or bad for him. I don't know that that's the case. I don't know if we can ever know that that's the case. Certainly sending $1.4 billion to this stupid organization can't count for very much. But engagement with Russian troops in Syria or sending weapons to Ukraine traditionally would be considered to be bad for Russia. Don't know whether they're bad for Putin. Glenn continues here, though, and says, all of this deranged talk from the establishment wings of both parties, led by their new heroes of CIA and Bush-era neocons, and also some other people, but why credit any of them? Because, Glenn's got a thing he's doing here, about how Russia is the enemy of the U.S. and we're at war with Russia, will inevitably worsen this already high conflict between two nuclear-armed powers. And he's correct. These two powers are both nuclear-armed. And he's correct in this sense. I'll give him credit for this. There's certainly people who are saying, who are intent on reiterating Russia is an enemy, or we're at war, or cyber war is war. And I understand why they're doing it, and there may be multiple motivations. One of the more recent motivations, I think, would be people are trying to and I agree with them. People are trying to hammer Trump's behavior into the framework of treason. And it doesn't require a whole lot of hammering, but to the extent that people who want to resist that definition, that matching of Trump's behavior to the definition of treason, whether it's because they're actual Trump supporters or they're just extremely skittish people who worry about, well, what would it do to the United States as a world power or our own stability here at home to be literally trying a president for treason? They worry, well, I either don't want it to happen for either because I'm a Trump fan or because I'm not sure what's going to happen at the end of this. And I guess they give us reason to believe that they're really relying in their arguments on the technicalities, the definitions. You can see that there's a very strict definition of treason, both in the Constitution and even in statute. It's not meant to be leveled lightly, and who can say for sure, you can't be guilty of treason if you don't help an enemy, and you can't help an enemy unless we're in a state of declared war. You've heard all the excuses. And I think there's lots of workarounds that are reasonable to get us there. And I'm willing to credit Glenn and others with saying, now, wait a second, you might be trying too hard to find a workaround here. And what do you really get from hammering this into the framework of treason anyway, if, as you also believe, the Republicans in Congress are going to remain absolutely intransigent and unwilling to acknowledge any of this anyhow? And that's a tough question to answer too. We'll take a break and try and organize our thoughts and come back to it after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I didn't really organize my thoughts, but I did ponder the name of the gentleman from the Atlantic Council. Is it possible that he pronounces Vajdich as Vedic? Possibly. I'm hoping. Though, quite honestly, it's a lot more fun to say, yeah, his name is Daniel Vajdich, and that's a lot of fun. Anyway, we left off analyzing what we like the second tweet from Glenn Greenwald. This is going to be a long show, but I think where we left off, we were kind of talking about hammering the behavior of Donald Trump into the framework of treason, which is tempting because then you get to execute him. I mean, once you get through the whole due process thing, but why don't we do the execution first and do the due process later? I always say when I'm imitating Trump. It vindicates us in many ways, like totally and completely, and explains so much. And I understand the desire to do it, and I think it's not wrong entirely to say so. But I recognize there's some wiggle room here. So he's concerned, Glenn is, about the effort to define Russia as an enemy and to declare us to be at war when there is, if you rely on, I guess, what used to pass for strict constructionism, on the fact that there's been no declaration of war. But, I will say this, Glenn Greenwald is the last person who, if he was being consistent, would agree that the United States doesn't wage war anymore because there's been no declaration of war since World War II. I mean, you know that he's not going to agree that any of our other military actions aren't waging war, despite the fact that there's no declaration of war. So that one might fall away pretty quickly. But, you know, there's still room for argument, like, okay, the things that are going on as between Russia and the United States, are they war? And there's a pretty good argument to be made. Well, the nature of warfare has changed. The weapons we use, the goals of warfare have changed in the sense that, you know, when we're talking about a certain level of specificity. I guess the goal of warfare to be able to influence, you know, anything, outcomes elsewhere, is the aim of war, whether that's through occupation and annexation of the territory and political union. Remember, we spent an awful lot of time talking about political union earlier in the week. Or whether it's, you know, just regime change and you will remain ostensibly independent and sovereign, just we want a different sort of government in place over there. Or whether it's, you know, fighting over something specific like water rights or, I don't know, tariffs. I guess we could have a war about at this point. So, you know, there's certainly, I don't think an honest Glenn Greenwald is able to argue that there hasn't been a change in the nature of warfare, or that information warfare isn't an important venue of international stress. I'm looking for new words here, new terminology. But, well, you know, I guess when it comes to what he's worried about here is, okay, if you successfully hammer this into the definition of being at war with Russia, and everybody were to accept that definition as being true, and it wouldn't necessarily require any great contortions to do so, then the next question is, if it's just regular war but by other means, doesn't that mean, I mean, aren't we outside the definition that we used to understand of what war is if we refused to acknowledge, for instance, that this current state of war could foreseeably escalate to outright military hostilities, shooting war, and perhaps nuclear war? If not, if that's beyond imagining, then maybe we aren't at war. We might be doing something which, you know, is belligerent with one another in information, what we call information warfare. But if there's no situation in which you can see that sort of conflict escalating to a shooting conflict by some natural progression, then maybe it really isn't war. Maybe it really is just something else, some other form of belligerence, and you're overstating the case, and therefore you're off base with the treason idea. Maybe. I will acknowledge it. Glenn Greenwald then continues by saying, the reality that will never go away, no matter how many people you block or unfollow and ban from your cable shows, I guess he's got some complaints, is that official D.C. policy under Trump has been more hostile to Russia's agenda than it was under Obama, not less. Read this thread. And he begins by referring us to the thread of Ronan Burtonshaw, who is, I don't know what, the Europe editor for Jacobin magazine, whose tweet reads, and the first one in his thread reads, "It was only a matter of time before we got here, liberal pundits beating the drums of war." And I guess the liberal pundit he's talking about here, because I see the link, the tweet he's including here is that of Carol Cadwalader, who's, I guess, is she a liberal pundit? She's a reporter at The Guardian, and we've read her coverage of the Brexit issues and not Trump Russia, but Brexit Russia, and, you know, by extension, some Trump Russia. But I don't know, is she a pundit or just a report? I don't know whether that's just misattributing anything. I haven't read that thread. It might be of some interest to us, entirely independent of what Ronan Burtonshaw and Glenn Greenwald have to say about it. But what they're trying to argue here is liberal pundits beating the drums of war. See, it's only a matter of time. I knew it was going to happen. Both sides are the same because we've always traditionally said that it was the Republicans who were belligerent warmongers, but here are the liberals now being belligerent warmongers. Of course, I mean, one difference you might point out, and this requires accepting certain beliefs at face value, and that's maybe questionable, but one difference, at least from the liberal perspective, is we always accused Republicans and conservatives of being belligerent warmongers in the cause of oil grabbing or money grabbing or whatever, that there was profit motive to their interest in warfare or Islamophobia, possibly also a frequent cause. Whereas surely liberals today would be arguing that and this is interesting, this is a rather more conservative approach to things, I guess you might argue. This has been one of the traditional reasons for entering into warfare, declared or otherwise, when you are attacked by another country or when another country attempts to so manipulate your vote that your right to self-determination is threatened. And you can what about it forever for all you want, and that was certainly a topic of discussion on Tuesday. Well, what about the things that America has done to try to influence or even overturn the results of free elections in other countries? I mean, we have done that. There's no doubt about that. There's some question about to what extent we've done it with Russia, but there's certainly no doubt about the fact that there have been popularly elected and I assume freely elected leaders of other countries, particularly in Latin America, South America, where the populace has been in favor of somebody that we considered a little too socialist for our taste, so we actually just outright overthrew them, sometimes using covert operators, sometimes not. So we have done it, but that doesn't answer the question of what should those countries have done about it. If all things being equal, if they were able to fight us on equal terms, would they have gone to war with us? Or if they had had the upper hand, if somehow we had been foolish enough to intervene in their elections and they were clearly the superior military power, would they not have gone to war with us? I think that they would. It's just that we did the things we did largely, not only because we wanted a different outcome, but because we knew we'd get away with it. That they hadn't the military strength to stand up to our interference in their sovereignty. And that if there were another geopolitical actor who did have the strength to do it, they might not be willing to risk that. Would Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, fight the United States in an outright open war over Nicaragua's right to self-determination? The answer is no. Nicaragua was the Soviet Union's Montenegro, I guess, in a sense. Not really, because they weren't in any formal alliance. That's a bad analogy because we are sitting here in a NATO alliance that actually absolutely does obligate us to the defense of Montenegro, as much as that may dismay Tucker Carlson. And it wasn't the case as between Nicaragua and the Soviet Union in the same way. So maybe a bad example. But that's basically a truth. We have interfered, and they did what they could about it in Nicaragua, which is to say nothing. The United States has other options, or at least in theory has other options when dealing with Russia. But ultimately it comes down to the same thing. Do you believe it's worth launching nuclear weapons over? And if not, what are you going to do about it? And also, by the way, if not, could you arguably just say, well, then if you're not willing to do that, then it's not a war that you're involved in. It's something else. Anyway, the question of whether or not Trump policy has been more hostile to Russia's agenda also involves a couple of other questions, some of which we've already asked before. Is Russia's agenda Putin's agenda? Does Trump believe he's provoking Vladimir Putin with policies that are hostile to that ward of Putin, Russia? Or does Putin believe that the interests of Russia are separate from his own interests? And does he believe that Trump believes it? Does Trump believe that Trump believes that the interests of Russia and Putin are separate? And I guess the other question about being more hostile to Russia's agenda. I guess it's arguably true that some of these things are more hostile to Russia's agenda than things that were under Obama's rule. And I guess there the question is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? I mean, Obama was less hostile because it was a considered position. Trump is more hostile, but it is almost never a considered action. That's just his view of, well, the United States, when something goes poorly for the United States or against our interest, we'll lash out. That's how we'll handle things. That's not a good approach to anything. And Glenn does say at the beginning of the thread, look, I think this is a bad thing when these things happen. But he does have another point, which is if liberals or anybody, I don't even know that you need to hang this on liberals, but anybody who, is pushing to say, yes, let's consider this open warfare of the sort that can absolutely and maybe even should escalate to nuclear war, that would be a bad thing. We don't want to have that nuclear war. Now, lots of people will say, well, it can be bad and it can be the subject of contention without being the sort of thing, and indeed I would argue, I hope that it never will become the sort of thing that escalates to nuclear war, and that's true too. And so there's a little bit of hyperbole and looking past the details in order to make the argument that you're pushing to define this as warfare, to define this as treason, equals trying to declare nuclear war. It doesn't, but there is that danger. It's out there, and you should keep it in mind. But yeah, ultimately, I think the bigger turning point here is that Russia's agenda might not be Putin's agenda, just as Trump's agenda might not be America's agenda. So it's probably worthless to compare what Trump's idea of the difference between Putin and Russia is and what Obama's idea of the difference between Putin and Russia is. They're not compatible things. And so to say, well, he's been more hostile than Obama, it is a bad thing, but it's a good thing that Obama, gave careful consideration of what was going on. And it's a bad thing that Trump gives none. And I don't think it particularly worries Putin very much whether, how reckless Trump really is, because overlying all of this is, I really do think that there's plenty that Putin has over Trump and that he really can call upon Trump more or less at a moment's notice and make him reverse course if those things that Trump implements that he thinks are tough on Russia turn out to be tough on Putin. Putin can put an end to those things. That's the bad part here. I mean, the really, truly bad part here. Because if Trump were somehow to accidentally confuse his interests and America's, or reverse them, or find some way to put them in sync and lash out, he could be dissuaded from accidentally doing something in America's interest by a phone call from Putin that might use as its motivation something other than the President of the United States' due consideration for the long-term interests of the United States. That's a bad thing. That's the worst thing. It's the worst thing possible because you don't know what could possibly come from it or what would be motivating it. Let me continue, though, with Glenn's thread is almost done. Then we have to begin my own in response. Now, we'll leave aside Ronan Burtonshaw's thread, although I bet there's full of plenty of interesting stuff from Carol on that. Glenn's next tweet. In 2018, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists set the world's doomsday clock to 2 minutes before midnight, the apocalypse, midnight. The worst ratings since 1953. Sounds like Trump. The worst ratings. Okay. Its two main reasons were climate change and nuclear war, primarily from U.S. and Russia. Maybe reckless war talk is dangerous. Yes, reckless war talk is dangerous. Now, the two main reasons were climate change and nuclear war. Now, is that 50-50 or is that 85% climate change, 15% nuclear war, 99% climate change, 1% nuclear war? And recall also that he says it was primarily nuclear war. The nuclear war part of it is only primarily as between U.S. and Russia, and it's got to be primarily between them. They've got the most nuclear weapons to go around. But an India-Pakistan nuclear war probably moves the doomsday clock too. And, in other words, this is a very weak premise all by itself. But, taking a look at this thing, now we can let the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists speak for itself and see how they view this thing. The Science and Security Board hopes this resetting of the clock will be interpreted exactly as it is meant, an urgent warning of global danger. The time for world leaders to address looming nuclear danger and the continuing march of climate change is long past. The time for the citizens of the world to demand such action is now. That's the first highlighted piece. Then not highlighted says, hashtag rewind the doomsday clock, and the untenable nuclear threat. I don't know why this isn't highlighted. The risk that nuclear weapons may be used intentionally or because of miscalculation grew last year around the globe. Now back to the highlighting. Nuclear risks have been compounded by U.S.-Russia relations that now feature more conflict than cooperation. Coordination on nuclear risk reduction is all but dead. And that's the end of the highlighting. It continues, though. And no solution to disputes over the INF Treaty, a landmark agreement to rid Europe of medium-range nuclear missiles, is readily apparent. Both sides allege violations, but Russia's deployment of a new ground-launched cruise missile, if not addressed, could trigger a collapse of the treaty. Such a collapse would make what should have been a relatively easy 5-year something, and then the text cuts off. So it seems pretty clear that the one really and truly specific worry that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has about the risk of nuclear war has to do with disputes over the INF Treaty and the agreement to rid Europe of medium-range nuclear missiles that's been brought on by Russian aggression and Russian deployment of new ground-launched cruise missiles, not Trump-Russia, not Trump doing it, not Trump's renewed aggression, not his being the most aggressive or most, whatever it was, the toughest on Russia since the the end of World War II, whatever it is. So, like I said, I don't see that as a particularly strong premise, and he's sort of cherry picking, but okay. It's clearly true that good relations between the U.S. and Russia would be a better idea. I just don't know whether that's something that grows naturally or necessarily out of what Trump calls good relations between himself and Putin. I don't know how else you deal with Russia at this point. There isn't anyone else in charge of the nuclear arsenal of Russia, the nation, than Vladimir Putin. And there isn't, by virtue of our own system, anyone in charge of nuclear missiles on behalf of the government of the United States of America other than Donald Trump. So I guess it's best if they get along. But that solves only one problem, and only solves it maybe. I mean, we don't know whether or not maybe ultimately Putin's what if Putin's interest in manipulating Trump is pushing Trump to provoke that nuclear war that Putin wants to have, and he just successfully does that. I don't know why that would be, but we will never know because of the lack of transparency about what's going on here and our lack of accountability in our own system. Anyway, that finally results in Glenn's penultimate tweet, which was the first one I read, which was, whatever else is true, U.S.-Russia relations are an extremely serious issue, now being discussed solely through the lens of bipartisan/media groupthink, unseen since 2002, exacerbated by cheap social media grandstanding, like this, at least include some dissent. And here is the dissent. These American scholars say the real threat, right, is Russophobia. Finally, he says, and he really does literally say, finally, if you put someone on your cable news shows or retweet heroic people of the hashtag resistance using the glorious language of treason, war, and enemy when talking about Russia, ask them whether Congress should declare the U.S. in a war with Russia and what the U.S. should do in this war. And the answer is, since I've done it, no, you absolutely do not have to have Congress declare the U.S. in a war with Russia. And quite frankly, it's offensively stupid for you to say so, and about as hypocritical a thing as I could imagine someone like Glenn Greenwald ever saying, and that may be saying something for a lot of you, but I have had a lot more patience for Glenn than most of you. You know very well that the entire world is watching, to the extent that anybody in the world is watching, the entire world of people who are watching Glenn Greenwald all know very well that Glenn Greenwald never, in any other circumstance imaginable, would even approach making the claim that the United States only engages in warfare when it is under a congressional declaration of war. We all know you better than that. And it was foolish of you to even enter onto this grounds for argument. And you really ought to be ashamed of yourself. But I'm sure you think I should be ashamed of myself too. So we're even. It's a wash. Stop doing that. And I'll give due consideration to your thoughts, which I've been doing here for an hour. What should the U.S. do in this war? It will be a very different kind of war, because everybody has said that this is clearly not an open shooting war. It's a cyber war, as much as I hate the term cyber. But it's an information warfare. It's a propaganda war. It's an influence war. It's a very different kind of thing. What should they be doing in it? One, they should be learning to defend themselves against it. And two, perhaps sometimes the best defense is a good offense, right? Or they say it variously as the best offense is a good defense. Depends on who's doing the work here. But, maybe it is the case that Russia's information warfare infrastructure needs to be destroyed, challenged, contained, if you prefer that as the language of peace or détente. What should the U.S. be doing in it? Yeah, exactly that. Defending itself against attack, however you define defense. That's what the U.S. should be doing in its war. Does it require a declaration of war? Don't insult me. That's all I'm asking. Does it require a declaration of war? Where do you think we've been this whole time reading you and everything that you've written? Come on. That one actually personally disturbs me. So, okay, it motivated a certain response on my part. I spelled it out on Twitter, but for those of you who might not have followed it there, I'll explain myself, although I think we did it in bits and pieces along the way. Here's what I think about what's going on here and about what's collusion. Is Donald Trump a Russian agent? Is he committing treason? Like everything else, there's nuance to the answer. And of course, we're running up against a break, but let's get started. Trump has no idea whatsoever what the duties he owes the United States and its people, its polity, its political system as president. He never did. He never will. He's not interested. He basically thinks it's an extension of his job, whatever that was, at the Trump organization. It's the same thing. He has no idea what duties he owes the people of the United States. He may not even have any sense that he's doing Russia's bidding in all of this. He might really believe that he's not. I'm my own person. I'm making my own decisions. I'm not doing whatever Russia tells me. Maybe, yes, maybe no. But I don't think he believes it. He thinks that he's just being agreeable, that he's getting along with Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin, everybody knows Vladimir Putin he's the leader of Russia. And I have to, keep reminding myself and all of you as we discuss this thing, Putin's not the same thing as Russia. He's not supposed to be, but there's supposed to be some unity of interest here. In other words, It's fiduciary duty that Donald Trump has to the United States. And there's a fiduciary duty we assume other leaders should have to their nations and the people in that nation, the people in that country. I hedge only because, well, that fiduciary duty is our own concoction. It's something that's our preferred system. That's the way we prefer to think of everybody else. And one of the reasons we love democracy for other countries too is we understand it and we think we can get a handle on it to the extent that we can understand what you're doing, why you're doing things, and what you might do next. That's good for us. It's good for stability. It helps keep international relations on an even keel. And, that's the basic difference between democracy, even though it can be unpredictable because it's left up to a vote and you never know how the vote will come out. It's a lot more predictable than autocracy because it's hard to figure out. Well, sometimes autocrats are easy to predict. That's true, I guess, because you only have to guess what one person is thinking. But if you can get a sense of what, whether through polling or whatever tool you might use to measure public opinion in a country, it can give you a pretty good idea of, what policy directions are going to come out of it if they're operating through a functioning democracy versus, a poorly functioning one, or one that makes its decisions with an electoral college instead of a popular vote, say. That would also be a bad thing. But I guess if it's subject to being overruled by an autocrat, and a particularly unpredictable autocrat, and worse, I guess, the worst case scenario, an autocrat whose interests aren't necessarily those of the country he or she is ruling, and so therefore it becomes more difficult to predict what they're going to do. I understand what's in Russia's interest, I just don't know what's in Putin's interest. That makes things difficult. We'll continue with these thoughts after our short 1-minute break after this. Welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did you sort out your thoughts during the break? I didn't, but I do remember where we left off, so we can just continue on from there. I was saying in my first tweet, I guess I was not meant necessarily to be a direct response to Glenn Greenwald, and of course it would be foolish to even enter into such a direct discussion when you had about 40 minutes to air time. There was no way we were going to finish such a discussion. I'd have to abandon it for 2 hours in the middle. And who knows how that would look or how it would go or whether it would affect the substantive outcome, if there is such a thing as a substantive outcome, as a Twitter debate between me and Glenn Greenwald. And look, Glenn likes to go on at some length, and I like to go on while I go on, but I don't like to drag things out for days necessarily. And you can lose a war of attrition very easily with Glenn Greenwald on that front. I just thought, like I said, I was inspired to think a little bit about it and say, you know what, he's not completely full of it here. There are some, he has a bent about, going over the top with things, and it's bothersome in that it's at least mildly, if not outrageously, hypocritical that, he rails against how people will wage Twitter wars, and then he wages endless Twitter wars. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I was just thinking, okay, one, the issue of declaring war and what sort of war are we in and is it dangerous? It's actually all worth considering because we do hear from Trump quite frequently. It's a good thing that we get along with Russia. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And there's a sense in which that's true. It would be a great thing if we got along, if the United States got along with Russia. Unfortunately, none of the things that are happening have any real chance of making that true, really almost no matter what they do, unless it's entirely by accident. And that comes from the problem of having Russia ruled by Vladimir Putin, who holds a very different set of interests than the Russian polity would, very likely, if it had its own mechanism for self-determination. And similarly, we have the same problem here in the United States. Ordinarily, we have presidents, who, with varying levels of honesty, have more or less faithfully executed the office of president, in the sense that they realize that as much as they'd like to serve their own interests, there's a greater interest out there, and they do from time to time, to a greater or lesser extent, feel the tug of that greater, broader interest of the American polity. And I don't think Trump has that. I don't think he feels it. I don't think he's capable of feeling it. I think he's a narcissistic personality disorder gone even further horribly and more horribly wrong than most. And it's not a feeling he would recognize if you could somehow impose it on him. He wouldn't know what was going on. He wouldn't feel anything. So, all right. So what's happening here? I think there's an alternative explanation for all that he's doing that doesn't require his having any sort of conscious allegiance to Russia or Putin, however you define either one or both of them. It's just he thinks he's doing something that should be considered to be the right thing. He thinks he's being agreeable by doing what Putin asks, and that he might, I think, therefore, be genuinely confused about why other people say it's bad that we're, what are we talking about? In his mind, he's talking about getting along with Russia. In my mind, and probably a lot of your minds, he's giving away the store on a lot of fronts, or endangering Americans' long-term interests. And, there's room for difference, obviously, about something as broad and sweeping as America's long-term interests. That's one problem that we have, one nuance area that's going to always create problems. I just think he has no idea what the long-term implications of agreeing to certain of Putin's requests, whether he frames them that way, or demands. And I don't think he's at the point where he's making demands of Trump. But I do think that that's entirely possible, that he either is, has, or will get to that point. I think that's the worry that we all have with, compromising information being held by Putin over Trump's head, is that one day when Trump isn't able to convince himself that doing what Putin asks or suggests is a good thing for him, then he'll be forced into doing it by the threat of blackmail. That I don't know whether we've reached that stage or not. Lots of people think there's no other possibility, but I think that there is, and that the possibility is Trump is as dumb as he looks. Here's what I mean. When he insists that he's being tough on Russia and points to, and this was something that was, this is where it became explicitly in my mind anyway, motivated by what Glenn had to say, even though I didn't respond to him directly, because he doesn't own this argument. Lots of people are making it. When he insists that he's being tough on Russia and points to things like increased military spending, right? And saying that's bad for Russia. And he wasn't even really pointing to increased military spending, by the way. He was Glenn was pointing at increased spending on this, unknown institute of some kind. What was it? The European Reassurance Initiative, which we really should look up. And there are some responses in the comments to Glenn about what that place is, and some of those raise some eyebrows, but that's sort of peripheral to the point. But even if it was increased military spending and increased military engagement, even with Russian troops in Syria or whatever, these things are not necessarily bad for Russia in all cases, right? You point to especially increased military spending. I mean, in the abstract, well, that's bad for Russia because why? Now, why is increased military spending, by the way, and this would be a good question for Glenn, it'd be an interesting way of putting it. Why is increased military spending bad for Russia? If Russia and the United States aren't enemies, and we shouldn't be declaring ourselves to be at war with Russia, and we should be avoiding that at all costs, why is increased military spending bad for Russia? Russia's only one of several, what are we at? How many countries are there in the world? Only one of hundreds I think, of countries in the world that could find itself on the other end of American military power. And I guess our own country could as well. So whatever the total number of countries in the world is the universe of nation states that could find themselves on the receiving end of increased military spending, which reduces Russia, in terms of numbers, to a minuscule possibility. Increased military spending is either a good or bad thing for United States interests by itself, period. And really, first and foremost, unless you just, there's a legitimate point of view which America should be pacifist and withdraw from the world. Perhaps, I don't know whether both are necessary. And increased military spending is antagonistic in itself toward everyone, and that includes Russia. But it's an awful long walk to get there. Military spending increases are bad for Russia. Now, engaging their forces is a little bit easier to imagine as being bad for Russia. But as I was saying in the tweet anyway, when he insists he's being tough on Russia and points to increased military spending and the like, and declaring that to be bad for Russia, it only highlights the problem that Trump has distinguishing between Russia, the nation, and Putin's enterprise, which among its many weapons is that it leverages Russia's state power as its own, or at least to serve its own interest. When Putin has an interest in making a profit in, let's say out of something in Montenegro, he has the ability to leverage Russia's state military power to do things that either directly result in what he wants or trigger something in world, in the world's reaction that will tend to bring about the situation he wants to exploit for personal profit. That's an enormous asset to have, and unfortunately, it's one we have via the Constitution. If you believe we elected Donald Trump president, have handed him as well. And he knows it, and he wants to do the same thing, and he doesn't see anything wrong with it, both because he has no understanding of how the American government works, and really, why bother, and because he sees with his own eyes, that's how the Russian government works, and they're like the number 2 government in the whole world, so why shouldn't we do the same thing? Well, because we're, by your stupid definition, I'm sure, the number 1, and they should be following our example, not vice versa, but okay. Trump, though, I think he genuinely thought when he set out to win the job, if he really thought he was going to win the job, to the extent he gave it any thought at all, I think he genuinely thought that running America was going to be just like running the Trump organization. And I put both in scare quotes, running America, because, of course, that's not really what a president who's subject to, balance of powers and other separate but equal branches, even though we've perverted the use of separate but equal there. I don't think he understood it. I don't think he ever wanted to understand it. I don't think he ever knew what it meant. And I don't think he thought he was going to have to live with it. But I also put it in scare quotes when I say running the Trump organization, because I'm not sure he did that. And I'm not sure the Trump organization was a thing that was real or had to be run in any sense, or that he ran it in any sense, or that it was successfully run. I'm sure of that. That's definitely not true. But Trump thought, I think, that being president of the United States would be like running the Trump organization, about executing his own will, about waking up in the morning and making things happen that he wanted to happen. And that great deals, as he saw them, were going to be, by definition, good for the United States. Why? One, because he's a believer in the prosperity gospel and the political science that goes along with it. That is to say that successful rich people, when they get what they want through the leverage of the power of the government, it's a good thing for everybody. That's the capitalist system at work. And even if the obvious results are horrible for poor people, who cares? Also, there is that possibility. It's objectively wrong what we believe. However, we are objectively winning all the money, so we're just going to continue doing it. Anyway, there's a school of thought that's out there that believes that that's the way the United States ought to be run. But in addition, there's this other level. He thinks that when he makes a great deal, even if he's just making it strictly for himself, like I get to open a hotel in Moscow, that's a good thing for the United States. Why? Well, you can find a way to argue that it is, even if it's stupid. It promotes an understanding between us. I now have an interest. Like, I'm not going to nuke Moscow now because that would be nuking my own property. So, sure, that's ordinarily people would say that's a terrible motivation. But, if you're right, if you really are down to the nitty gritty of the question of will you nuke Moscow, and what I need to talk Donald Trump out of being dead set for nuking Moscow is, but you'll lose your hotel. If that works, that is a good thing. I mean, bad motivation, good result. Right? On the whole, in the immediate sense, like no nuclear annihilation right now, today, that's a good thing. It gives us an opportunity to work out all the other things that need to be made good here, like getting rid of a president who makes decisions this way, as opposed to having a president that makes decisions like, well, I won't nuke Moscow because it's bad for the world, period, and hotel or not. In fact, let's raise the hotel and ask you the same question. If the answer is still, no, I'm not going to nuke Moscow, good. That sounds like we're on a better track. Versus, sure, what the hell, why not do it now? Okay, we have not made any progress here, guy. So, anyway, on what basis would he come to think this? Well, there's plenty of, prosperity gospel / neoconservative / just regular old paleoconservative political theory, which is stupid and baseless, but which is widely believed by a lot of very stupid people, that what's good for you personally as an American businessman is going to be good for the U.S. because prosperity gospel. When rich people benefit, it's good. That's a bad theory, but it's out there. But in addition, he has his life experience, I guess, which has taught him that when I make a great deal as the boss of the Trump organization, that great deal is not only a great deal for me, it's a great deal for Ivanka, and a great deal for Eric, and a great deal for Don Jr., and for, what's her name? Tiffany, and the other one, boy, with the Baron. It's a great deal for, it's even a great deal for Melania. Why? Because it makes money, and when it makes money, they get money. That is a good thing. Getting money is a good thing. I make a great deal. I'm the only one there. I'm the only one in the room. But who benefits? Think about it right away, immediately, right off the bat, just in my own family. Don, Eric, Ivanka, Tiffany, Barron, that's 5, and Melania, 6. 6 people immediately have made millions of dollars because of what I did in a room somewhere. Already, the effects are multiplying. So, why can't I do that for however many people are in the United States? Like 70, 30,000 millions, or whatever the number is. I'm not really sure how big the numbers are. But I'll make a deal, and everybody will benefit. He believes every time he's made a deal, his family has benefited, and other people could also do benefit, anyone who's directly connected to the deal. But if I'm making, obviously, people who don't work for the Trump organization might not necessarily benefit. The other party sometimes benefits too, and the general public benefits because they get to see my beautiful buildings and go in them and drink overpriced coffee or whatever it is that happens to go on in them. Or run prostitution rings out of them, as was in the news today. We didn't even get to that. We're not going to get to any news. Forget news. But, if you ask them, well, but so big deal. You're qualified to be president now because you would make a deal and 6 people would benefit. Well, I've just explained hundreds of people benefit. Right, but there's hundreds of millions of people in the United States. Oh, my God, really? Are you serious? That's a lot. Okay, but as boss of the Trump organization, I was able to benefit everybody in the Trump organization and everybody who did business with it. Now, if you want to expand the number of people who are going to benefit from my great deals, all you have to do is make me the boss of all these people. Make me the boss of the United States of America. When I make a great deal, then we all get a piece of it. And I think he just really believes it's that simple. That's it. That's why making me president will be a good thing. He has no understanding of, and certainly no patience, let alone aptitude for, the concept that fiduciary duties might come before pursuing profit. And I don't even necessarily know, based on his record at the Trump Organization, whether he knows how to pursue profit properly, or if he ever made one, or even what a profit is. You know, I'm sure he has some business school understanding. Well, profit is the amount of money you make above and beyond what you've invested in some deal. And then you get more money, and that's the profit. You know, you get paid back for your investment, but then above and beyond that, that's the profit. And I understand. You know that from business school. But for instance, I think if you ask Donald Trump whether certain deals that he made that you know based on the books, the math, were not profitable, and ask him, were they profitable? He'll say, yes, they were. Even having defined for you properly what profit is based on his having spent a few minutes at Wharton or reading some books or whatever, he kind of knows what profit is, but he can't apply that definition to himself. One, because he's has narcissistic personality disorder, cannot admit that something wasn't profitable. Why not? Because profit is success, and he's successful. And if I admit that this deal wasn't successful, then fine. Even if everybody knows that it lost money, he will look you in the eye and say, yeah, but there's so much more to a deal than just profit. Even though, I know, I was trying to tell you before, there's so much more to a deal like being president of the United States than profit. Yeah, different. But he'll tell you, there's all sorts of other things that go into a deal. There's profit, yes, but there's also prestige and building the brand and building the name of Trump as a luxury brand around the world. Sometimes you lose money on these things, but as long as people come away with the impression that Trump is synonymous with luxury, sometimes we spend too much. It's true. Sometimes I invest too much money in making things the best, making things the most luxurious. And sometimes that individual property might not necessarily, all right, I admit it, it might not return a profit in the traditional sense, but it does so much for the value of the Trump brand there at that property and elsewhere around the world, and reaffirms for everyone that Trump equals luxury. It's worth the money. It's actually all the money that gets lost in that particular property is an investment in all the other properties. I also think on top of all of this, he has no concept of what is profit and am I successful beyond, do I still have money? If I need to buy something or pay for something, do I still have money in my bank accounts? This one, that one, the other. Can I transfer? Can I sell an asset? Can I transfer money? Can I steal? Can I borrow? Anything? Do I have access to money? If I do, if I'm not destitute, if I'm not thrown out of my home, I am successful. And if I am successful, then I am profitable. And the things that I did resulted in my having this money. Yes, it started out, he inherited $200 million. Yes, it's true he might have even more money if he had simply, as somebody once pointed out, just, invested in certificates of deposit or in the, it played the market or whatever, bought mutual funds. He might have more money, but the fact that he hasn't run out is all he needs to define himself as a success. And as everybody knows, profit is something you get when you're successful in business. So the fact that he's still alive and can pay for things, or people will take his word for it that he can pay for things, and that's enough in order to get the garbage that he wants to hang on the walls of his various residences, then that's it. That's the definition of profit for him. So a person like that, it's not difficult to believe, has no understanding of what success as head of the United States might mean. That's clearly beyond his conceptual ability. And he has no sense that he owes anybody any duty beyond doing what he thinks he does best as often as possible. Because whatever he does is a success, and whenever there's a success for an organization he supposedly leads, everybody in that organization does well, does better. It's good for them. So he can make no mistakes, and now he's in charge of the entire country. The country is making no mistakes. Everyone's doing better. Doesn't matter whether you are or not. You're in this country. You're part of this country. However he defines it anyway. You're winning, and you'll get tired of all the winning because there's nothing but winning. Because if you get to define what a win is, guess what? You win all the time. So this is a difficulty for him. And what bothers him most, probably, the greatest source of his frustration as president is that there are, as part of our system, these various institutional requirements, the Constitution, our statutes, state laws, federal laws, regulations, norms, political considerations of all kinds, and they're so mercurial. He doesn't know that word, but we do. There's no keeping on top of them. All of these things, though, that are, have accumulated to become part of our system, all of them ultimately were designed at some point to thwart the ability to run an individual and completely unaccountable personal regime from the White House. You're not supposed to be able to do that. We never trusted anybody with the ability to do that. We've come closer and closer to it, but there's always something out there, some avenue of accountability, as atrophied as it may become, that at least technically exists out there. And it can be undermined at any time by justices like, say, Brett Kavanaugh or any of the other nincompoops we've seen on the Supreme Court. But all of those things, to his mind, are inexplicably placed as barriers in his way. We need to run the government like a business. And of course, he has no idea how a business runs, having run just this privately owned family thing that isn't even particularly profitable, not a publicly accountable, publicly traded business that has all these stupid things that they have to comply with. And he thinks those are the less successful and his are the more successful. And it may have to do with the fact that he moves in CEO type crowds, and he can't believe it whenever he hears about people who are incredibly wealthy and incredibly successful because they're the CEOs of giant publicly traded corporations who, are hamstrung when it comes to things like, can you sell off a certain division of the company and just keep all the money and use it to build yourself a fabulous mansion somewhere? There are mechanisms you can use to do that, yes, but you can't simply snap your fingers and sell off an entire unit of a company and pocket all the money. It's not yours. And people will say, no, you have to go through these channels. I can't understand how you people are able to do business that way. No, of course you can't understand it. You have no experience with it. You run a different kind of business, and not very well, I might add. So, that's problematic, and he has no experience, and he just thinks all of these things that we put in place they're supposedly, in the end, to guarantee that there's no way a president really can simply put his own interests first and still also believe that that's in the long-term interest of the United States. The transparency, the accountability, as convoluted as it sometimes is, that's built into the system, is all about the norm underlying all of it is that the person who occupies the presidency is supposed to have, first and foremost, the interests of the United States at heart, not mine / the United States because prosperity gospel, not mine and also as a result those of the United States due to the Trump gospel, but us first. And not only that, the real true norm is us first and, to the extent practicable, not you. You need to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Remember that phrase? They used to use that a lot back when there was a Democratic president. Avoiding the appearance of impropriety. Even the appearance was enough. Those were the sorts of things that made us suspect that you didn't have our interests at heart. And that's that's gone. That's out the window completely. We don't even talk about that. That phrase isn't even mentioned anymore. That's a joke at this point. But we did use it relatively recently. It's not like it fell away in ancient times. We used it during 2016, during the entire election. The entire premise of the press's continued over scrutiny of everything that Hillary Clinton did was that, well, she's supposed to be avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. That's the standard here, and she's not doing it, which is one of the even more amazing things about the entire way everything was covered, not just but her emails. And same problem, but a different look at it. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Late re-entry on this as I'm just scanning a few other things. I think we could probably go on for 10 hours. Not that I believe anyone would listen for that long, but let's continue on here. Try and get ourselves back on track, because there are a few other things related to this that I do want to refer to, including taking a look at Ronan Burtonshaw's tweet thread on this too. Because again, still, there's stuff in there that makes you say, I agree with that, or that did happen, or we did do that, and that's bad, but some things that need some pushback. I think Ronan doesn't probably necessarily think so, but, maybe he's open to debate. We're not having that debate. It's a totally different sort of a thing here. We're just talking past one another, but I don't know. It feels therapeutic for me. You're stuck with it. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, here's where we left off in my own tweet storm here. I also, at this point, sort of pivoted to pointing out, by the way, being a Russian asset. Like, do I think Donald Trump is a Russian asset? Yeah, sure. Now, that's a loaded term, obviously, and I'm sure it's, one that, I don't know. Glenn Greenwald himself, or people who agree with Glenn Greenwald, or maybe Ronan Burtonshaw, or others, even some of you, probably say, oh, now come on, hold on a second. That's either taking things too far, or, oh, yeah, so you think we should be at war, or whatever it is. Now, wait a second. I don't think that being a Russian asset, and here's how I tweeted. Being a Russian asset, I don't think, actually requires any particular allegiance to Russia. There are different kinds of assets. I mean, is Maria Butina a Russian asset? Yes, absolutely. No doubt. Hard to see how that's a difficult thing for her. She's Russian and considering working directly for the FSB. That would be a Russian asset. Sure. Is that even what we're talking about when we're talking about Russian assets in this country? No, we're talking about people who are like either double agents or, secretly Russian agents or sleeper cells or whatever. But no, it doesn't, and I don't know how they consider it in tradecraft. But when I'm thinking about it, and this might coincide with the tradecraft definition, might not, I don't know. I'm willing to use a different term. But being a Russian asset, it seems to me, doesn't actually require allegiance to Russia. Like, do I think Donald Trump has an allegiance to Russia? No, I don't think he has an allegiance to anything, not even the United States. I doubt very much he has an allegiance to Russia. He might have a personal admiration for Vladimir Putin, but I don't think that equates to allegiance to Russia. I don't even think it equates to allegiance to him. I think that guy's cool. That doesn't mean I'm going to jump off a building if he tells me to. What does allegiance really mean anyway? I don't know, right? So, okay. So I don't think he has any particular allegiance to Russia. I don't even think he has any particular allegiance to Putin other than he thinks he's cool and he thinks that guy knows how to president. So, if I'm looking for advice on how to be president, I'm going to ask a guy who's been president of his country. And maybe there's no country in the world like the United States. Nothing's as great as the United States of America. We're the best country in the world, best country in history. But if you have to get advice because you're new to the job, who are you going to turn to? Montenegro? No, you're going to turn to the number 2 country in the world, even if there's an argument about what that might mean or how you define it. The point is that guy will talk to me and give me advice on what to do. Sometimes maybe the guy in China, whatever his name is, will do it too. But this guy will tell me how to be president. Now, as it happens, he's telling you what to do. Here's what I want you to do as president of the United States because that helps me. Well, I don't want to help you. I want to help me. Oh, yes. Well, what I mean is it helps our 2 countries. Is that Transylvanian or Russian? It helps our 2 countries. And when we get along, our countries get along. Because, you and I both agree and believe in this prosperity gospel, some version of it. When you profit, America profits. When I profit, Russia profits. When America and Russia profit together, that is cooperation. That is world peace. And, there's a sense in which that could possibly be true. If, of course, it were really true. If it's assumed to be true that America does well when its leader does well and Russia does well when its leader does well, that's not our system. We don't believe in that. He does. We don't. So it's not working out. And our system supposedly consent to the governed. We don't give our consent to that. So no. So guess what? It's not working out. Maybe if we gave our consent to it, it would work out. Or maybe we would if we gave our consent to it, that would mean we would believe that this is meant to work out. And so we would just come away with the impression that it did, even if it didn't. So who knows? But here's the thing. We were talking about being a Russian asset. What does it mean to be a Russian asset? What would Russia consider an asset to be? And I think the only thing that they really require out of an asset or to think of someone as an asset is, will this person relatively reliably do what I ask them to do, what I want them to do, whether I force it on them or make a request or hint at it or wink, wink, or I'll get in touch with you or I'll have my people call your people, whatever it is. Will you do what I ask you to do? If I ask you to have a meeting with me and that we have our meeting with no staff present, you do it. Why do you do it? Do you do it because you're afraid of me? Do you do it because of the P-tape? Do you do it because you'll lose all your investments in Russia or my people who launder money through your projects that leads directly to profit to you will stop doing it and your money will dry up? It might never come to that. It doesn't need to come to that. It's good for Putin to know that it could come to that so that in case Trump were ever to decide, I look bad in all of this, and so I'm going to say no for the sake of saying no so that I look good and strong, but it's something that he can't afford, if it's something that Putin can't afford to let go. Once in a while, I'm sure he'll say, win some, lose some. This one wasn't that important. If in the long run he still feels like he's making a show of being independent and that's enough to help him survive in office, I'll let that go once in a while. But if I absolutely need to have it, well, then out comes the leverage. And I'm sure it doesn't go directly to the P-tape. I'm sure, there are levels through which he'll go. But like I said, it may never get to that. It may just be, pardon me, if you asked for me, and I don't know where the idea of an unmonitored meeting came from. It may be that Putin said it would be best if we met that way. It may be that Trump simply, as a holdover from his days at the Trump Organization, thinks that's a good thing. When I used to make deals, it was because I would sit down with the CEO of the other side and we would work something out over lunch or playing golf, and that's the way things get done in business. Well, it does if you're running a private business. That's a way that things get done. And in effect, it's a way that things get done in public business or publicly traded businesses, or yes, even in government. People do sit down and hammer things out one-on-one. The difference here is if Donald Trump, on behalf of the Trump Organization, sits down at a lunch and makes a decision, according to the governing regime, such as it is of the Trump Organization, that decision stands. It goes. That's how that system works. In a publicly traded business, the CEO may come to a conclusion under similar circumstances, and it may then at that point be implemented exactly as agreed. But technically speaking, It's the CEO carrying it back to the board, and the board saying, we trust the CEO, and holding a vote. But there's steps along the way, and there's a record of it. The board voted. And if you've ever participated in a board of a publicly traded company, or the board of a charity, or the board of anything, your congregation, if you belong to a congregation of faith, or a charity that you serve on, or the local neighborhood coalition, or anything. Everybody rolls their eyes sometimes at the procedure that you have to go through. Yes. Okay, we all agree that that's something to do, but remember what we have to do here. Can I have a motion that we do this? We all agree we want tuna salad for lunch. I think it's a terrible idea. 6 of us in this room. It's a small place, but look, we all have a hankering for tuna salad, and we'll be out of here soon enough. Long term, we're going to be okay. Tuna salad, yes? Yes. All right, I'll order the tuna salad. Hold on a minute, somebody will say. Can I have a motion to order the tuna salad? And you say, isn't that just you making the motion? No, technically, according to my rules, I'm not allowed to make that motion, or whatever. Or even if it is, if you are allowed, fine, I do so move that we order the tuna salad for lunch. Okay, good. Look, everybody in favor of having tuna salad, raise your hand. Hold on. Do we have a second? Oh, you're kidding me. Fine, I second the tuna salad. I told you 5 seconds ago I wanted tuna salad. You're going to ask me to put it on the record. Mr. Recording Secretary, please note that I second the motion to vote on whether or not to have the tuna salad we all just agreed to have. Fine, good. All right, all in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Those opposed? Nobody's opposed. I know, but if I don't ask who's opposed, there's a problem. All opposed? 0. Okay, so duly noted. It's 6-0 in favor of ordering tuna salad. That's how tuna salad gets ordered. Not because the CEO agreed to have tuna salad, but because the board agreed to have tuna salad. Now, it may very well be, I hate tuna salad. All 5 of us who aren't the CEO hate tuna salad, but we know that if we dissent or ask for chicken salad, we're going to get fired or undermined or somehow find ourselves uncomfortable, and so we're under duress. We all agree to tuna salad. That's as may be, and you may or may not have a mechanism to redress that issue, or shareholders who will sue when they find out that you made your decision under duress. But the opportunity is there. Not so in the Trump organization, and infinitely more so in the United States of America organization. But Trump doesn't believe in those things, and here's the populist angle, right? Tell this story at a Trump rally. Hell, tell this story to your friends. Tell the story to your friends who were in the room voting with you on this nonsense. And what are you going to do? You're going to all roll your eyes. Everybody knows the vote is 6-0. And I know it didn't take a whole lot of time, but it's so stupid. We got to go through. Somebody has to make the motion. Somebody else has to second it. We have to note that. I have to ask all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. All those opposed. No one was opposed. You just saw the vote. I know. But this is the way these things have to work, right? And tell that story to people, and people say, God, it's so stupid. You should just be able to, and it leads to people saying, you ought to be running the government like a business, because of course it's much more convoluted on the government side. Not only are we all have to make a motion and second it and have votes, but that has to be done in 2 houses of Congress, and then it has to be written up on parchment, and it has to be sent to the president, it has to be signed, and if he doesn't sign it in thus and such a way, in thus and such an amount of time, and yada, yada, there's all the procedure that goes with it. We love the procedure. We explain the procedure all the time. It's fascinating. But why do we have it? We have it as a layer of, one of many layers of protection against the possibility that someone willful enough could decide to simply run the country like a business, even though, as we learned, most businesses, those that really count as successful businesses, are run a little bit like the way we run the government. But, that's not the argument you make at the rally or anywhere else, and not what people mean when they say run government like a business. Oh, you mean have board meetings where we have to make motions and second and vote on whether or not to have a vote on having tuna salad for lunch? That's your big improvement for government? Do the same thing? It's really not. Of course, the suggestion is be an autocrat. run the government like a business. Oh, well, I work for a publicly traded business and it never worked like that. We never had a say in anything. We never had to review stuff. Well, you didn't. The board did. And they resented it, but they did it. But whatever, the business I worked in, the CEO was, their word was law. They were a god. Yeah, they were, but they had to go through a certain procedure. They didn't literally snap their fingers and have something happen. In effect, it went that way because everyone was afraid of them, or everyone was motivated by the money they were going to make by going along, which is sometimes the same thing, but there was a procedure. And the procedure is, why do publicly traded companies have to go through this? Because if you're asking the public to invest in your company, right, there has to be a certain level of expectations about how things are going to be done, the way governance is going to work, the transparency of it. You can't take people's money, according to our laws. We could come up with a different system. We just didn't. But according to our laws, at bottom, if you can't just take people's money in investment and then do something completely different with it. You can, in effect, you can change the direction of the business all the time, but there have to be decisions made and then the opportunity, at least, once a year, a shareholders meeting or whatever, for them to give you feedback on either change your direction or I will make my decisions accordingly about whether or not I want to continue to invest or whether I want to divest from your company based on, the nearest approximation of transparency that we can get, as watered down as it is, and as much of an effort as you guys on the board make to water down transparency even further so that we don't see you stealing as much money. Every once in a while, these things come up. We discover them, and they make the newspaper because you have to jump through transparency hoops. Donald Trump doesn't want to jump through those transparency hoops. That's the reason why you don't have no staff meetings, no note-taking meetings, no recording, and you're not allowed to talk to my interpreter. It's not necessarily because we think, oh my God, your first allegiance is to Russia. It's that we just want to know what the hell's going on in our country. That's the way it is. We didn't grant you the ultimate power to be the chief diplomat and the commander-in-chief and all the other things that you're the chief of blindly. We would like to be able to retain some control so that the next time we are asked to vote on you or members of your party to represent us in Congress, we have some idea of what we're voting on. And your hiding from those things isn't just, haha, I'm so populist, everyone knows that procedure is stupid. It's got real implications. He just doesn't know what any of them are. One, because he's never had to comply with any of that. And two, because he's always believed it was frankly pretty stupid. And three, in a very populist sense, most people also think that stuff is really stupid, unless you get the chance to argue with them. Well, it's either the stupid stuff or no information whatsoever. Because what's the motivation to record the decisions you're making for review by the shareholders later if there's no penalty for not recording them? And in fact, you're encouraged not to because it's super businesslike not to. Then when somebody either steals on purpose or makes a bad business decision based on horrible reasoning and loses all your money, then you have recourse. There are things you can point to try and recoup your losses if you think you've incurred them wrongly. But without that record, you can't do it. Which of these systems do you prefer? Almost always, unless you're at a Trump rally at the time, you will opt for the complicated one that protects me. Yes, that's reality. Anyway, so how do you get to a meeting with no staff? It could be that Donald Trump just believes from his own practice that's the way good things happen. That's the way you get things done. What's the big deal? Why do I need all this claptrap around me? Seconding things and making the recording secretary write stuff down. That's how he views having staff around. And also, what's the big deal about agreeing? If the idea came from Putin, what do you want me to argue with Putin? You want me to fight? You want us to be in nuclear war? Glenn Greenwald would ask you. He wants to bring a note taker. Donald Trump says, I can't remember anything. I have the greatest memory ever, but we should have a note taker or whatever. Or my people tell me this is not done and that there'll be an uproar. if I do. I don't want another uproar. Sometimes I don't care, but okay. In this case, I don't want an uproar. Listen, Vladimir, can't have it. I got to bring somebody. Well, I'm just saying, P-tape. So, you could escalate, or you just rely on Donald Trump's simpleton's understanding of things. Look, what's the big deal? I don't need this. I remember everything anyway. Vladimir, you ask for a thing, I'm going to be agreeable. You want it, you got it. And what I say goes in my country, so I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to come alone, and we're going to have our discussion. What's so bad about telling this guy who could potentially nuke us all, I will do this favor for you? Because nothing is lost by my not having anybody with me, in my mind, right? So I'm going to agree. I'm just being agreeable. Now, whether that's something that you need to motivate him to agree to, or he's just stupid and will naturally agree to something, what difference does that make to Russia? And if they can get what they want out of you, are you an asset to them or a liability? The answer is you're an asset. That's all there is to it. Meanwhile, you, as Donald Trump, you're thinking that you're giving them this meeting, even though you think you're giving them this meeting because that's the way business gets done in the minds of the Russians. I don't give a good goddamn why you come to this conclusion. Just do it. Do it my way, or else I'm going to have to pull out. Oh, you're going to lose money. Oh, I'm going to be mad. Oh, we're not getting along. It's going to look bad, or up to and including P-tape. It's never gotten that close, I'm sure. You never had to. So, anyway, so all of this is done, I think, by Trump because he doesn't think he's giving away the store to the Russians. I'm in control, okay? It's going to be fine if I go in there with no staff because I'm not going to give Putin something that is bad for America just because he asks. I'm smart. I'm like a smart guy. I went to like one of the best colleges and everything. I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm in control. Now, you may be, you may not be. We don't know. But in the meantime, while you're making this decision, I think it's apparent to all of us, you have no clue, not only when you're being manipulated, but even if you did have an idea of when you were being manipulated, occasionally, once in a while, and you recognized it, the idea that you think it's going to be okay because I know what I'm doing is evidence that, A, you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know what you're doing because you have no idea, because you have a simpleton's understanding of what the president does and what's at stake. You have no idea how much turns or can turn on what gets decided in that room. I know what was decided. I was there. Well, even if they're all fantastic things that get decided, implementing them, one, is bigger than a one-person task. Two, you are never going to be the person that implements any of this stuff. You're far too lazy and stupid. And you know that. And you consider it a hallmark of being a successful businessman that you are able to delegate those things to others. And it's actually what the president is supposed to do. But these are enormous tasks, and delegating it to your body man isn't enough anymore. At the Trump organization, it was, because you were a small-time loser, essentially. You want to build a building somewhere? I'm sure you can delegate that yourself. You want to turn worldwide policy? That's going to require a lot more moving parts, more than you could possibly imagine. And because it affects the whole world, it's going to need analysis and implementation and reaction from around the world. Every country in the world pretty much is going to want to know what happened here, what's coming, how do we react, how do we participate, how do we resist, what is it? All that, you have no idea how much turns on what gets decided as between the president of the United States and the president of Russia, even if they're honest people. You have no idea how much is at stake in there, because there's never been that much at stake for you. And who cares even if there is, because the only people that would suffer for it are you and your family. And of course, you don't measure profit and loss. It's just, do I have money or not? And since you've never run out, fine. Everything will always eventually work out. But as I put it originally, you have no clue how much turns on what gets done in there and why there would need to be a transparent record of what happens in there. The whole world needs to know. The whole world needs to react. The only thing that's coming out of there is instructions from Russia about here's what we agreed to. And it's silence from the Americans. And there's a whole half of the world trained to believe that as between the Americans and the Russians, you believe what the Americans say about what was said in there. And they are working without instructions. That same half of the world is trained to believe not to believe the Russians when they say. So not only do they have no instructions from the Americans, they have only things they can't trust from the Russians. Now, there's another portion of the world, not half, but some other portion of the world that I guess is trained to believe the opposite, not to believe the Americans, although probably more than half of the world doesn't believe Americans. But I meant that there's probably something less than half of the world trained to believe the Russians. I don't know if there's anybody trained to believe the Russians, but maybe that's an American conceit. But the rest of the world doesn't know what to do, or even what's being asked of it, or how to prepare for it, how to comply with it, how to resist it, whatever it is, without clear indications from two responsible parties. And it might be impossible to have two responsible parties if Putin is there. So maybe in some sense it makes no difference if Trump is there. But I doubt it. I think that the world had a better sense of what went on in meetings between Obama and Putin. And the answer might have been nothing because there was no deals, that could be made as between the two of them. But Obama would come out and tell you what didn't happen in there. Russia would lie about it perhaps and say something different. But everybody knew, all right, agree with them or not, you can pretty much rely on the Americans for giving us the basics, if not everything that was said in there. I'm sure that some people got sold out secretly along the way. But to Trump, it would never occur to him that anyone else would need to know what happened. So he's just not going to tell you. And he also may have no idea what happened in there. And it might just be that meeting with Putin is essentially about getting advice about how to be president in his mind. And, in Putin's mind, of course, it's me giving instructions to you about what to do and how to do it in such a way that doesn't offend your ego so that you go ahead and do it. And if there's no way of me putting it gently, I'll just put it to you this way. Do it or P-tape. And that's that. Now, we're not going to have a chance at this point to go over Ronan Burtonshaw's tweet thread, but it was a pretty interesting one and probably worth taking a look at, as was Carol Cadwalladder's discussion of what was going on from over on the other side of the pond. But here's something totally unrelated in terms of why it was generated as a tweet, but I thought might make an interesting parallel in terms of if you were having, I don't think any of you guys really had any difficulty, but if you run into somebody, if you want to have this discussion, and you find that there are people having difficulties, say, understanding why you need to separate Putin from Russia and Trump from America. Probably nobody has that problem anymore. But why is it that you when you negotiate with Putin, you're not really necessarily, you shouldn't assume you're negotiating with Russia? Or why is it that we're always so concerned about what oligarchs are doing? After all, they're just private citizens who happen to be rich. We're not going to necessarily be doing the bidding of Russia just by making a deal with an oligarch, right? And I assume that has something to do with Trump's willingness to make deals with oligarchs. I'm not dealing with Russia. I'm dealing with another rich person. In America, two rich guys make a deal. The government has no interest in it other than taxing it. As between me and Russia, it should be the same thing, except, he forgets there's espionage, there's bad faith, there's I'm actually an agent of the government, and we keep reminding everybody you can't really make it and stay an oligarch in Russia unless you're willing to knuckle under, in some respects, enough to satisfy Putin anyway that you're in his pocket. Otherwise, he'll kill you and steal your money. But if you're having difficulty explaining that to somebody, you might try this unrelated parallel that I just happened to see float by. And no chance I'm going to pronounce the name right. Dr. Tichanda Prescott Weinstein. Oh, maybe I didn't do too badly on that. Had this tweet, and she was tweeting about something completely different. Sort of. Well, maybe it's related. You'll all see it as the same thing. Israel and the Palestinians and hating on the Israeli government versus the Israeli state or the Jewish people who live there, reminding everybody. A reminder, she says, that criticizing Israel is not fundamentally anti-Semitic, as sometimes is accused, right? Happens all the time. People, they want to demagogue the argument. Criticizing Zionism even isn't anti-Semitic. Criticizing the Jews is anti-Semitic. Refusing to criticize Israel because of its association with Jews is anti-Semitic because it's condescending. And it's a part of a longer tweet and thread, and you get the gist of it, but I think it's an interesting parallel situation here, right? Criticizing Russia isn't the same as Putin. Criticizing Putin isn't the same as Russia. Making a deal with Putin doesn't mean you're in line with Russian interests. Things that are bad for Russia aren't necessarily bad for Putin, and if you're really looking to affect how Russian policy gets made, maybe things that are bad for Russia aren't the targets. Things that are bad for Putin will get you better results. Just like sanctioning or placing tariffs on American goods in retaliation for our tariffs, Canada, is not necessarily going to change American policy, but you'll get Trump's attention faster by sanctioning Trump.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, thanks for listening to this rather self-indulgent 2-hour rant about things. I hope I didn't bore the hell out of you. I hope I gave you actually something interesting to think about. You need a roundup of the news, though. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putton is coming up next, and he will tell you all about those high points and lows in the news next.